And again, tonight we have Robert, who's going to be talking to us about advanced Fiddler techniques. And I think that that's about it. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can get Robert to present.
Well, we'll get started then. Like we said, we're going to talk about advanced Fiddler techniques. My name's Robert Boedigheimer, and I don't mind taking questions as we go. I have somebody watching the chat, I know, and hopefully somebody there in the room that if you have somebody that wants to ask a question, we'll try to take it as we go. Otherwise, we can just wait till the end is fine as well.
Okay, wonderful.
A little bit about myself. So I'm a Microsoft MVP for developer technologies, specifically for web and security. I'm a Progress champion. So Progress is the current owner of Fiddler. And so I think I am the Progress champion for Fiddler. So I do a lot of talks about it. I've used it forever and really enjoy it. So I do training videos for them as well. I'm a Pluralsight author. I put my Twitter, my email, and blog. And I will have a link at the end to the slides. So if you want to see those at the end, we can do that. So we'll just jump in and get started. So the protocol we're going to talk about today is HTTP. So it's the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. I gave you the various RFCs here. I've used them. So I've had specific things like caching or other things that I wasn't sure if it was a browser bug or if it was something with mine. So I've actually gone through and read the specs. They're pretty readable and there are useful things in there as you're going through. If you're going to be a web developer, that's good stuff to see. So I put 1.1, 2, and HTTP 3 links there. Also, HTTP is a request and a response paradigm. So you'll see the client making requests to the server. And the request has header sections I'll show you, and also the body of what's actually being sent, and the same with the response. There'll be a header that has kind of metadata about the response, and then the actual content for the response. So this is the protocol we're going to focus on throughout this talk. So what is Fiddler? So Fiddler, so that's a picture of Eric Lawrence. I actually met him. I was in Austin for that conference. Then I've talked to him a lot and had a lot of conversations and email and such. Never met him, so I had the chance to meet him, which was cool. He was working at Microsoft, and he was the manager of the clip art. So this was a very long time ago. People would purchase clip art. They tried to download it and use it. It didn't work. They would call support, and Eric was just paying attention on these support calls. There was no good way for people to troubleshoot what was going wrong. So he didn't know C#. So .NET and C# had just come out. He didn't know either of those, and he didn't know HTTP, and he decided in his spare time he was going to write Fiddler. So I always find that kind of amazing what people do on the side. And so it was interesting to meet him. It was acquired by Telerik in 2012, which is now was bought by Progress. I gave you the link there where you can get the tool. There's actually 2 tools now. Fiddler Everywhere is the latest. It's meant to be cross-platform, so you can run Mac, Linux, or Windows. It's got a more streamlined, you could say, updated UI. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit, probably at the end. I'm going to focus today on Fiddler Classic, which is only running on Windows and has been around for a really long time. And the only reason I'm going to focus on that in here, at least at the beginning, is some of the advanced techniques that I use that are useful are not available in Fiddler Everywhere yet. It started out and it's been doing a great job kind of catching up from a functionality standpoint, but there's still some things in there that it doesn't have for this talk. There are some cool things they have that Classic does not. So HTTP 2, for instance, is not supported by Fiddler Classic. I'll warn you, as I was prepping all my demos, I've got both of them installed on my machine, and I actually had them both open at the same time, and that tended to mess up some of the things. So I'm going to try to stick with Classic, like I said, first to go through things. So I'm going to open it up here. So what it is, it's sitting between my browser and the web server, and it's watching all the HTTP traffic. So if I were to go show, I've got a sample web page. I hit Control F5 just in case anything was cached. And if you see, I can see this is a typical web transaction, I guess you would call it, or request and a response. Today, it's about 100 requests for a given page. So in other words, this first request, I can go over on the right-hand side and see what the requests look like. We'll talk about this as compression. And if I go down here, you'll see here's the actual HTML that people are used to seeing. I talked about the headers. So here are the response headers that came back. And then here's the actual content. I like to show people who are new to the web as far as development and even to the marketing department and others that it's not just one simple request that builds a web page. Today, it's an average of about 80 requests that have to happen to get all the CSS, images, JavaScript, all that stuff. So you can see I've got a couple CSS files, images, some JavaScript. So I just made the first request. I got the HTML back. The browser started parsing all that and makes requests for these other resources. So this is what we'll be in today, but just so you see, this is basic usage of capturing traffic between the client and the server. How does Fiddler work? So Fiddler uses what's called a proxy. So because Fiddler wants to be between the client and the web server, it utilizes, so Windows and other machines have proxy settings. And so if I went in my browser, so I'm going to actually just go shut down Fiddler here for a second. Go back to the browser. I'm just going to go into my settings. It's going to search for proxy. So right now I don't have a proxy server set up. I'm not running Fiddler. So as I'm making requests, I go back here and just hit Control F5. I'm looking around on various sites and I see everything I want to see. If I open up Fiddler, what it will do is it's going to change Windows proxy settings. So basically tells Windows, I'm running over here on a given port. So 127.0.0.1 is your local host or your own machine. So it's running on your local host on port 8888 by default. You can switch that if you need to. But what happens now that I started up Fiddler, it wants to notify Windows that if anybody wants to use a proxy for HTTP or HTTPS, come through me. So I'm going to just step aside here. I'll hit proxy again. This is my problem I was having before. So somehow running the two of them got me screwed up. So let me go close my browser and what it's going to do, it wants to hook into that. So I'm just going to see if it comes up. Oops, of course, now I set the wrong one. Now you get to see what Fiddler Everywhere looks like. Close it right away. Be a short demo if I don't get any of my traffic. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to open up Classic again. So it's told Windows, and once it notifies Windows, typically, and I'll close this just to see if that helps. All the modern browsers basically understand how to ask Windows where the proxy is sitting so they can route through it. So I'll make a request for my page again and hit Control F5. Okay, I can see I have my traffic through here again. But again, all it's doing is it's telling Windows, I'm running on this port on this IP address. And what clients will do if they care or if they know how, they will start routing traffic to that IP address and that port. And that's what enables Fiddler to sit between the browser and the server and do the inspection that it wants to do for the traffic. And the reason that matters is a lot of people want to trace things, and it turns out the thing they're trying to trace does not support proxies or needs to be manually set. So like I said, all the modern browsers figure this out. If you're doing things like I'm running ASP.NET on my laptop, so I've got IIS running, I have my client on my laptop, but maybe that ASP.NET site has to go out to third-party locations to call services using HTTP. When it does that, by default, the traffic between the browser and the server will get traced. That's where Fiddler's sitting, but the traffic from the server going out to those other services doesn't do that by default. So I'm going to talk about some ways you can set that. But if you're not seeing traffic in there, it's because the client might not support a proxy. The other thing to note, Eric had started out with the term web session, meaning a single request and response. So if you look through, he's got a book that I'm going to put at the end. I've always thought as an ASP.NET developer, a web session to me was a series of ASP.NET requests. In the terminology and in the stuff you'll see in Classic, just be aware it's a single request and a response. So there's a lot of things I can do on those sessions. So I'm just going to go back over to here. I'm often going to send these to people. So a lot of our operations people, our security people, a lot of the vendors that I'll work with, I'll do a trace and I need to send it to them to communicate what's wrong. So I can come here on this bootstrap and maybe say I want to mark it. I can just mark it with a color and say, that way they know what they're looking at. I can put a comment on. Now when I send that stuff across to somebody else, they'll see that that's highlighted. They'll see that I have comments in there. I can save this off. So if I want to save the response, I can actually save the response body. So if for some reason I'm on a site and I want the image or a logo or something I need to use, I can just save it off directly here. If I do the entire response, it will have the headers and the body, and that's typically not what you want. So you can pick response body and save it, and then I would just have a local copy wherever I save that, so that's useful. We'll get through a couple of these other ones, but there's just things in here that you can come and take action on individual sessions. I want to do some searching. So in this case, it's not uncommon. Obviously, there aren't that many requests here, but work on an e-commerce site for many, many years, had issues, had to come in and troubleshoot. Maybe I would look through this list and see, here's the HTML, but if I look down here, I could see this, there's a font file here that's being requested that I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know why that's there. I don't remember referencing it. So there's a couple different ways I can look for things. I can say I want to do a search, and I'm just going to type in that name, Halflings. And I'm going to hit find, and you can see it found the actual font file that we noticed because it was searching in URLs. But what I wanted it to do was tell me who pulled that in. So be careful when you're doing searches if you use compression. So if you do performance stuff, I do a lot of web performance talks, you want to be using HTTP compression to make the file smaller. I need to decode that compressed content, so search can look through the decompressed stuff and see if there's any matches. So if I do that, now you can see it pinpoints Bootstrap. So I didn't intentionally pull this file in, and if I'm wondering who did it or why, now we can see that points back to that is being referenced from within that CSS file. So again, there's not a lot of requests here, but if you're on a big site, you have 100 requests or whatever's going on, it's a lot faster to be able to find things that way. They also added the ability to just find the parent request. I can pick the font and say, I'm not going to search, just tell me who was the parent here. And it also identified Bootstrap, which is helpful. So the main thing there is if you're doing searches, make sure that you decode the compressed content. Another thing people may not have seen before, I'm going to work with my resolution here a little bit, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Okay, so you can start to see the content types here. If I want to search for, say, all of the CSS files that are referenced for this, I can actually hit the Alt key, and I can click on any part of this I want, and it will find other requests that match that same value. So if I got the Alt key down, I hit that, it found the other CSS file. If I want to see all the JPEGs, I can just say, hold the Alt key, hit JPEG. So it's just a quick way for you to identify where all the JavaScript files, where all the CSS. It's just one of those hidden things that most people probably have not seen. Next, we'll talk about HTTPS. So if your website does not use HTTPS, it should. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Troy Hunt. So he does have a Ben pwned. And he was having fun with somebody who had a site hosted, and he was trying to convince them they should use HTTPS. And the person said, I don't need it, right? I'm just a public site. I don't know what the site was about, but it wasn't commerce. So Troy said, do you give me permission to show you why you want to use HTTPS on your site? And he said, sure, do whatever you want. So if you're ever bored, go watch it. He just owns this site. He's got, unicorns, rainbows. He's just doing a lot of things because that's not encrypted. So everybody should be using HTTPS today. I wish people would stop talking about SSL. So SSL, HTTPS is the protocol. It needs to use transport layer security. And so the old technique of that was SSL or secure sockets layer. That should be dead. Unfortunately, a lot of people still say using SSL when they really mean you're using HTTPS. You should be using TLS. I believe from a PCI compliance standpoint, you'd have to have at least 1.2. 1.3 is out. It's pretty well supported. We actually turned on TLS 1.3 for our site one day, and it turned out our site was 20% faster. So there's some speed improvements. I won't get into all of that. But what's weird is you want to use HTTPS. It's secure. The whole point of it is between your browser and the web server, people can't see your stuff. How would Fiddler be able to do this? This should bother me that Fiddler claims it can look at your HTTPS. So again, it's a proxy or it's a person in the middle. It's turned off by default, but I'm going to walk you through how it works and why it works that way. So I have my performance site here. I'll pull this up. So it's using HTTPS. By default, if I come into Fiddler, I can see the tunnel. So there's actually a connect request. So I can see that it's establishing an HTTPS connection out to the site, but I can't see all the CSS and all the JavaScript and everything else because that's sitting in HTTPS and I shouldn't be able to see it. What I can do though is I can come into Tools Options, HTTPS, and I'm going to say I want to decrypt HTTPS traffic. So it's important to know what this means. This isn't that you can see everything on your whole network. What you're saying is if I have any traffic that I route through a proxy through Fiddler, let it decrypt. So I'm going to do that. So the way that Fiddler does this, it actually becomes its own certificate authority. So if you know a little bit about HTTPS, when you're the site on your server, you have to get an certificate that is used for signing. So Fiddler Classic is basically sitting in between, and it says, I want to act like I am, and I'll just pick on Bing, right? Bing is encrypted. I want to look to the client like I'm Bing. Well, how does it do that? It needs to be able to send a certificate during the handshake that says it's Bing. So the way it does that, again, Fiddler's just going to be its own root certificate. So it says, do you want to trust Fiddler Classic root? I'm going to say yes. It'll say, do you sure you want to trust that? You can read all that if you want to. Yes. Are you absolutely sure you want me to do this? Yes. So now what I've done is I've said, I am willing to, in my browser now, I am going to treat that Fiddler, anything it signs and claims to be a certain server, I'm going to trust as a client. So by doing so, Fiddler's going to see a request go out to Bing, and it's going to say, I'm going to tell the client, I'm Bing, here's what you should use to do your encryption. The client will use it, send it to you using that because the Fiddler has its certificate. It can decrypt that traffic. When it goes out to actual Bing, it wants it to still be encrypted, so it goes out, gets Bing's server certificate, and re-encrypts it. So it's safe on the wire, but Fiddler therefore is now able to sit in between and see that traffic. So let's go back here, and it falls right in the world. So I hit Control F5 just to make it request everything again. And you can see here's the tunnel that we saw before, but now I can see those requests again. So you can see down here, I've got some of the JavaScript, I got some of the images, the CSS. So all that's done is basically said, now anytime I go for HTTPS, Fiddler has to act like it's the real server, and that's the mechanism that it uses. It creates its own server certificate, signs it, and then just uses it to decrypt before it sends it on. So that is HTTPS. Next thing I'll show you is filters. So the filters built into Fiddler are meant to be easy ways to do some common things. You'll see through the talk, there's other ways to do some of these things, but it's just meant for if you just want to pop in, do something quickly, that's what filters are useful for. So I'm going to clear what I have shown here. I'm going to go into the filters tab. So I've got it enabled. I say I want to use filters if I have them on. I can do some blocking based on hosts. So I could say I only want to see stuff from Bing. So it's a way for me to limit. The first time you turn on Fiddler, if you haven't done this before, you're going to see the sessions just start flying on the left-hand side. There's all sorts of conversations by all sorts of services on your machine that are using HTTPS to go out and talk to people. Sometimes that's just way too distracting to have. So you want to be able to come in here and just say, I really only want to see traffic from certain hosts. You'll be able to do that. Or if you had a host that you said, I want to see all the requests except the telemetry that keeps going to Visual Studio or whatever, you can come in here and specifically turn those off. You can do it by process. So I could come in here and say, I have a specific process running on my machine. I only want to see traffic from that process. So sometimes you may have multiple browsers open and you only want to use one particular one. If you can figure out the process number, you can come here and say, I only want to see traffic from that. A couple other things. So far, those have just been showing or not showing things. This next category starts to play into some of the things Fiddler can do. One of them is deleting request headers. So I can actually modify things that are being sent. So let's go back and make a request. Let's do my local site here again. Control F5. So if you've seen the compression before, I'll go into the inspectors. I'll show you the raw view up top. And again, I apologize. It's kind of scrunched on the screen due to the resolution. So the way that it works is the browser is sending to the server here and saying, I want you to get me the file that's at that URL, but it sends this right here, accept encoding. So what that's doing is the browser says, I know how to do compression. So when it sends to ask for that file, it says, here are the 4 different ways that you could compress things for me to make it smaller when you do the transmission. So that's what normally happens. And if I came down here, I would see stuff that is compressed. I had taken that off already. So that's what triggers the server to say it's safe to do compression. If I came into, if I go into my filters, I can actually say delete that header. So don't, in other words, the requests are going to come from the client. They're going to have this header on for all of the requests because the browser knows how to do compression. I'm telling it specifically before you send it to the server, strip that header out. I want to see what happens from a size standpoint. So let me move this a little so we can see the size. So these were the sizes when things were compressed. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the browser, hit Control F5, come back over here again. Because it stripped that off, so if I look, before the homepage was about 2.9K and now it's over 10. And the Bootstrap CSS is about 122K and compressed was about 27. So it's just helpful for me to be able to do some tweaks to the requests that would be hard for me to emulate otherwise. In other words, browsers don't typically let you go in and say, don't do compression. Because Fiddler sits in the middle, I have full control, and I'll get into other ways to do it, but the filters are just a quick hit way to get some major things, so I can do things like that. I can also set up some breakpoints. I'll show you that a little bit later. I can hide things. So if I don't want to see a bunch of requests that are going for, like I don't want to see the 304 statuses, I can turn those off. I can also block things. So I can say block all the CSS files. If I go back and hit Control F5, shocker, it looks like this. What's newsworthy about this? There is a way to inline CSS. So it's a performance technique where people say, I'm going to take the core CSS I have and actually embed it inside the page. That way I don't have to actually wait for an external style sheet. I obviously did not do that here. So if I looked and said, I'm concerned for some reason my CSS won't get downloaded correctly, this is what the page would look like. So I might want to pull out enough to show like the gray background and get it at least to be somewhat usable. So it's interesting to be able to turn that stuff off easily for JavaScript files or images or CSS. I can also flag, so I don't have to deal with GDPR, European, for some of the cookie handling and the cookie banners and warnings and things like that. If I want to see requests that are going to sites that are actually setting cookies, I could turn that on, and it will then, everyone that is having a cookie set will be flagged in the session list. So that's kind of useful if you care about that. So that's filters. Again, it's just meant to be some quick things you may want to do without having to do a whole lot of work. One of the things that Eric found out as he was doing this, so you can save them. You can actually save off filters, like import and export them. So if you have, while I do this testing, I want to have this filter settings and stuff, you can do that. People set filters and forgot. And then they would send to Eric and say, I'm not seeing, like they said they want to hide something or only show from a certain host. And I don't see traffic anymore. There's actually, if you turn on help, troubleshoot filters, everything that gets filtered out will have a strike through. So you'll actually be able to see it, and you'll be able to see they're not normally showing it because you asked for that to be filtered. He said that was one of the major things people would request, that he decided to add that feature to it. Next one is Composer. So Composer is really how Fiddler got its name. You can fiddle with the requests, meaning I showed you before how I could take a request header out. Composer lets me either create it manually if I want to do it, or I can just take an existing request or response, drag it to the Composer, and then make changes to it. So I'll clear this out. We'll pull up this again, hit Control F5. Okay, so I'm on the site, the same page we've been looking at, and I want to see the same thing we were just doing with if I took off compression, what would happen? So there's a Composer tab. I'm going to take the homepage request and just drop it over here. And the whole request that gets made by the browser to the server is sitting here. Now I can modify whatever I want. So in this case, I'm just going to say take this off, and I want to see what the server does. So I modified it, I hit execute. It's going to run it again. You can see that it's not doing compression. And so that did what I expected. So again, it's a way for me to change things that go between the client and the server to make sure that the server responds correctly. So where would you use this? Well, I've got this super high-tech tablet store here. And it says I can buy this cool device for about $1,100. So I'm going to just hit checkout here. It said, hey, great, you made an order, is $10.95. I'm going to pop over here and I do capture the flag competitions and stuff too, where Fiddler's a very handy thing to have. I'm just going to look at that post request. So right here, when I hit the button to do the post to send it to the server, I'm just curious what it actually sent. So if I scroll down, you can see, oh, that's interesting. The cost of the item is actually part of what the client sends to the server. That's probably not great. So let me take that over to Composer. This is a way to check if your security checks are working correctly. So it wouldn't be possible, right, for me to make that just $1 and have it work. Well, we'll see if they coded that correctly. So I can go back here. It says 1, go into the inspectors, take that off. If I roll down here, you place an order for 1 for $1 each. That is awesome. So from a security perspective, we know never to trust things coming from the client. So by doing this traces, we happen to notice that they're sending the price, which is a very bad idea, and it can be tampered with. And again, this is useful for doing a lot of security testing and probing. It's not always easy to make the modifications that you'd like to make. It is when you have Composer, because I can literally switch anything on the request that I want to before it gets sent to the server. So that's the power. Really what differentiates Fiddler from a lot of other tools is it sitting in the middle and giving you the opportunity to make modifications to things, not just, what goes back and forth. Another cool thing is curl. So I work with pen testing orgs and security people, and they love to use curl commands. So they would do a report on my website. They'd say, you have this flaw, here's the curl that you should run, and you'd be able to prove that you have this problem. I searched around all over, especially when you're working with security things. I don't want to get a curl tool that's malware or has other problems. And I looked around and I was not finding products that I felt comfortable installing. And then I noticed that Fiddler does have a place to do that. We can actually go and do curl commands. So here in Composer under the scratch pad, this curl is just, it's going to run curl and make a request for Bing. So I'm going to highlight that, hit that, and you can see it made a request. It doesn't send much with the header, but that's what curl does, right? I can make more sophisticated, but just to make you aware that if you have to deal with curl, you don't have to use a different tool. That is something that's built into Classic. Next one is breakpoints. So it's cool that I could do the Composer, I could drag it. There's times where I want to see on the fly, before this goes to the server, I want to just have it stop, right? Just like Visual Studio, whatever your ID is, where you're stepping through and wanting to see, you want to be able to pause and change things. And that's what breakpoints let you do. So I'm going to clear this. So this is called the quick exec area. So there are a lot of commands for it. BPU, what that does is I'm saying, I want you to set a breakpoint. I'm assuming the U means up, like I want a breakpoint when I'm going to the server, making a request for the bootstrap min.css file. So I'm just going to hit enter. So now it's got a breakpoint looking for that. So if I come back in here, go back to the page and hit Control F5. If I come back in here, you'll notice it's sitting here. There's no result because it didn't send it to the server. If I go back into expectors here, I can see it's telling me that it's sitting on a breakpoint. So now again, I have the opportunity to come and do whatever I want. Since we know the use case, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to take that off and I'm going to say run to completion. So I intercepted the request from the client for that particular file and modified it however I wanted before it got sent to the server. Then you'll see it eventually comes back. And again, it didn't use compression because I specifically took that header out. So that's cool. I'm going to turn that off. So in this case, I just type BPU without a file, and then everything will be back to normal. There are times where I also want to be able to see, go to the server, get the CSS file, but I want to play with it before it goes to the client. So that's where BP after comes in. So I'm saying when you see site CSS, please pause before you send it to the client. So I'm going to clear this, step back and hit Control F5 again. Come back here and you can see it's sitting waiting here again. So the site CSS went to the server. The server said, here's what I want to send to the client. I'm going to take the compression off. That's what this stuff is. Now I can see the CSS file and I just want to see if I change the body color to red, what does that exactly do? And I'm going to hit run to completion. So again, you're sitting between.
I see the problem. Oh, when she turned her thing.
Got a little background noise. Not sure what that's from, but hold on. Okay, not sure if that was a question, but again, I'm sitting between the browser and the server. I let the request for the CSS file go to the server. The server sent me the response, but I could play with it before it went to the client. So I have found this useful when I'm dealing with vendors or other things. I might have something that's wrong on my production web server. I don't want to go through all the work of trying to make a change. I obviously can't just deploy it out to production whenever I want. So I can take advantage of this instead. I could say when that file comes back to me, I'm going to make what I think the changes are to make it actually work. And I can see if it fixes it in the browser without having to do any deployment. So it's just a very powerful way with breakpoints to be able to get it to stop in particular places where I want to see how things are going to work, if that makes sense. So I'm going to take that off again. So that's breakpoints, very powerful. Another cool feature is called the Autoresponder. So again, because Fiddler is a proxy sitting between your client and the server, it can actually return whatever information I want. So I've seen people that have taken their web server, they have a big demo to do, they've actually used Fiddler, they save off all their files locally, and then they can set up Autoresponder with a rule that says when you come and ask for this file, I want you to pull it off my laptop's disk. Don't actually go out to the server. And again, because it's sitting in between, I can do all of these things. So I'll show you some of the things that are useful. I'll turn that. We'll go back and do, I'm going to make a request for this again. So what I can do is say every time bootstrap min.css, I'm going to drag that over to the autoresponder. I want to change what happens when people ask for that file. So I've dropped it over here. It's created a default rule for me. It says when it sees the exact URL that has bootstrap min.css, I want you to do something. So here I use this often. I don't know about you, when I deal with vendors and they say, I want you to put this at the head of your website. It's just a JavaScript file. It can't impact your site. Everything will be happy. I can tell them if your site is slow, I'm not going to even be able to render. And when they don't believe me, I'll come in here and set this up. So I'm going to say, I want to, and I got to slide this over just a hair so I can get to the save button. So what I'm doing is saying, when you look for that CSS file, please wait 10 seconds. So now I'm going to go ahead, Control F5, and if all is right again, this is what happens, right? My customer, it's not rendering my web page because the file they claimed was not going to be a problem was running slow. So you can see the impact that that has on the user experience. So I use that a lot. I mean, I will go in and pick particular things and do delays on them. The other thing that's useful, if I want to, I can actually modify. So I was talking about, I could actually come in here, I could save off the response, save it to my desktop. I can go in and modify it, and then I can tell it whenever anybody asks for that file, pull it off of the local file. There's an easier way to do that if you're making small changes. You can say unlock for editing, and go back to the inspectors here. I'm just going to come on here and change the title. So the last time we asked for this file, it went to the server sent back Sydney. I'm going to try to adjust it like this. So I'm going to just take that off of editing, and now I can drag this over, and it's automatically set and said, if you see this, I want you to serve what I just modified. So if I hit Control F5 again, you'll see now my title changed. So again, this has been useful. I worked with a lot of designers that did CSS work on our e-commerce site, and they wanted to make a tweak to something, but they have no way to deploy to my server to see if it will actually fix it. So I had them use autoresponder rules. I didn't do the one I showed there. I actually did the file one. So again, if I were to save that file off to disk, I can just go pull up that actual file and say, whenever they ask for this, serve this. Then they would just give me a new copy of the CSS file. I would drop it, name it that file on my desktop, run the site, and then I could see all the changes they wanted to do to that CSS file. What does it actually look like without changing any of my actual servers? So again, that's one of the very helpful things to use in Fiddler Classic. The unmatched request pass-through, I just want to mention that. Anything I don't match on, I want to still go to the server and come back as normal. So if I didn't have this checked, it would not, all of these things would not work correctly because they'd be getting stopped. So just make sure that's checked and then set up your rules. And you can have more than one rule. You can see I have quite a few of them that I use for different demos. I'm just going to take this out so it doesn't actually run it when I want to see the page. Okay. So there are times for our website, e-commerce site, and we want to see, somebody would send to us and say, it doesn't work right on an iPhone or an Android. Fiddler runs on, Fiddler Classic only runs in Windows. And so I could get it running on my machine, but I'm so used to using Fiddler to troubleshoot things, I would just cry when I had to pick up my iPhone and go, how am I going to troubleshoot this thing? The way that you actually can do it, you can set up Fiddler on your laptop in Windows, and you can tell it, I want other computers to be able to connect to me, run through Fiddler as if I was their proxy. So the way you do it, I'm just going to run through the high level of this. First thing I have to do, I'll go into Tools, Options, Connections, and I want to say Allow Remote Computers to Connect. You can see I already have that checked. I was telling you, here's the setting for the default port for Fiddler. By checking that, Fiddler is willing to accept requests from off this machine, getting routed through that port, and it will do what it normally does for Fiddler and all the tracing. So I can get all the functionality I've been doing before, all the breakpointing, all that stuff, by routing the device through my Windows machine. So that's the first step. I have to say that I allow connections. Next thing I need to worry about, you may run into firewall rules, depending on how you have things set up. I've often used this when I'm at home. I've got my own Wi-Fi network. At work, typically they sometimes segment the traffic. I need to be on a network where the device and Fiddler can see each other and talk to each other. So at home on my Wi-Fi, I'm basically going to go to my iPhone. So I'll start with this. On my machine, I need to know the IP address of my laptop. So I can go run, get the IP address that I'm running as, and I know the port number. And I'm just going to show you how I did this. I don't have an actual device set up right now that I'm going to use, so I'm going to try to do it. Bear with me for a moment here. I'll try to get my desktop going. Okay. So in this case, I set up an iPhone. So it's weird on an iPhone, you don't set proxy settings in the actual browsers. This is in the Wi-Fi setting for iPhones. So on my iPhone, I have to go type in, this is the IP address of my Windows laptop that's running Fiddler. Here's the port that it's running on. Once I do that, it looks okay. Like here's my iPhone, yay. I'm going through this. Looks like it's supposed to. It's a responsive site, so it scales itself down. And then if I look at the Fiddler trace for that, I can actually see that the requests, here's the request. If I go look at the inspectors, I can see it's coming from an iPhone. So it doesn't matter what the device is, an iPhone, an Android, a Windows box, anything. I can force the traffic. If it's proxyable from that client, I can set the proxy settings to be my Windows box so that I can still troubleshoot things. That worked great for years. The only complication you run into this is when you start doing HTTPS. And I won't get into it here. There are blog stuff on Pluralsight about how to set this up. You need to make your phone trust Fiddler's fake certificate, or you won't be able to decrypt the traffic from that device. So just be aware that's years ago, before we were all HTTPS, this was simple. That's all you had to do. Nowadays that we're all HTTPS, you've got to set it up so that this Fiddler, its server certificate will be trusted by your phone. Like I said, there's some articles on how to set that up and do that. But that allows us to do tracing of any other device routed through our machine. And like I said, I can still do everything I want to do. I can set up breakpoints. I can do filters. Anything I'm used to in Fiddler, I can take advantage of, even though it doesn't run on an iPhone. So there are some common issues that you'll run into. So I'll show you a couple of them. Clear this. So up here, there's an any process. If I grab that, I can drag it and drop it on a browser instance. And this is another way, like you saw in filters. If I say I only want to trace one browser, if I have the browser, I can just drag it over, drop it on, and this will change to be the name and the process number. And then the only thing I'm going to see in here is traffic for that device. It's not uncommon for people that have used that feature to forget that they have it turned on. So even when they close Fiddler, come back, that'll be pinned to a browser that doesn't exist anymore. So now they're going in trying to trace and see stuff in Fiddler and it doesn't show up. So this was one of the other common problems people would have is they forgot they turned that on. The one that I do a lot more often than that is the capturing down here. So I'm going to make a request. And like I said earlier, it's annoying when you see all of these other requests start happening in the background. Like this stuff is not what I want to trace. So as soon as I get a good trace I want, I usually do that. So now Fiddler is ignoring, it's still passing it through. It's not stopping any of the traffic, but it said stop showing me and capturing it so that I have only what I want. And then typically I'd come in here, right click, and say I want to remove these, just so it takes them off. So this is just the clean request made to my site, but it's not uncommon that I go make a change, bop back over to the browser, come and it doesn't show anything here because I turned capturing off. So just be aware, turn it back on, make sure that's there and make sure that's any process. Those are two of the typical things you'll see. Next thing is the no proxy set. So as I was explaining before, if I'm doing ASP.NET, I've got my client, I've got IIS, I've got ASP.NET, I'm doing troubleshooting. I want to see the calls that go from the web server out to third-party services somewhere else. .NET does not proxy that traffic by default. One way that you can do it, you can go into config files and say, I want you to basically proxy all of the HTTP that .NET's going to do through this address and this port. So now the .NET code and all the classes and all the things you use there to make HTTP requests will automatically get proxied. So that's a good way if you have that problem to set it so that you can actually see the trace, right? You got to be able to be the proxy. So again, if you're using any kind of client and it's not showing up, look into the documentation about how do you set the proxy. If it's not default to pulling what Windows has, how would you actually set it? Next one is Fiddler Script. So there are times where I want to be able to intercept and modify traffic programmatically. So I don't want to have to sit there and do a breakpoint and do switches. I just want it to happen automatically. It's kind of funny, the name changes. While he worked at Microsoft, it was JScript.net, and then I think later they dropped the .NET part of this. It's a derivative of JavaScript that has some .NET looking classes in it. There are a couple functions in there, so I can run code before the request goes to the server, before the response goes to the client, before it goes to the server, and we'll talk about this exact action here in the demo. So now what I want to do is I can come in here and say I want to do it programmatically. I'm going to customize the rules, and here are all the rules about how this works. So again, this is the JScript.net language, so to speak. I have some stuff in here already, so I'm just going to go to it. So if I go up here, I'm overriding the on before request. So in this case, I'm saying before you go to the server, I might want to run some code to do something. So I'm going to scroll down here. One thing I could do is say if the request ends in a JPEG, make it yellow. So I'm just going to save that. I go back and run the request again. Control F5. Sorry. Oh, hey, good demo. Forgot to put my capturing back. I do that all the time. And now you can see it's yellow. Again, what's useful about that is I can just programmatically make changes. So that's not terribly useful to me. What is useful is I have had occasions where I wanted to just call my own web server, my own CDN, but I wanted to shut down all of a third-party requests for our site that go all over the place. I didn't want those to actually go. So the first thing I did is I just said, I just picked on Telerik here. If it's a Telerik site, change it to purple. If it's not a Telerik site, you can actually do a whole bunch of stuff down here. Like you can make it sleep for 25 seconds. You can make it fail with a 404. fail with a 500. So I literally use this again to find places where we had single point of failures that weren't caused by our website. So I knew I'm allowing traffic for the site, our CDN, every third party got treated either slower or failing. And then I saw how the page reacted. And if the page was not coming up, like it normally should, then I have some dependency on a third party that I have to go try to fix. So that's why I've used this mostly. There's a lot of things that you can do. Again, it's a programmatic way to modify the requests and responses however you want to. I'm going to go to the quick exec one here. Okay, so we saw the quick exec before, which is sitting right down here. I'm going to clear this. I want to make a request. I'm just going to go out to Telerik here. Hit Control F5. Maybe I don't want to see all the requests for some of these hubs. So I'll just pick on Cloudflare here. I wrote my own, I extended this to create my own. So I just said RH is going to be remove host cdnjs.cloudflare.com. So that's these requests right here. For some reason, I don't want to see those. I extended what Fiddler could do by writing Fiddler Script, and I'll show you the script here in a minute, but I'm just telling you, please get rid of those sessions because I don't want them, and you can see they went away. So it's just another way for you to extend. So there's this onExec action. So I just said, if you see RH, that's mine, and here's the code I had to do to take that specific host out, remove those sessions. So again, that's kind of cool. So this is a very nice way to be able to programmatically have things happen to your requests or responses that you want to happen consistently and don't want to have to set breakpoints or composers or other things. Fiddler Script will just run on every request in the event you want, and you can make the changes you'd like to see. There's also extensions. So you can basically build your own add-ons for Fiddler. If you follow that link, there's a few that come for Classic. So the first one is this JavaScript formatter. I go back and request the site again. Control F5. That's going to annoy me. Sorry, I need to change that. Try that again. Okay, that's better. So I'm going to turn on the first extension. So you see these minified JavaScript files right here. So if you've seen minified before, it's where it takes out all the white space. So you can see all the white space is missing. It's just crammed together. If I want to troubleshoot, I don't want it to be all in one big line like that. So he wrote an extension, this make JavaScript pretty. And if I go back and make the request again and pop back into here, you can see these are marked to say that they were modified. And if you go look now, it took the white space out. So this is not perfect. This does not get you back to the original source. If you're actually trying to do that, you should use source maps, and you'll get an exact mapping back to exactly what your code looks like. But if you want a quick hit that a vendor has a file or something and they don't have a source map and you just want to see if you can troubleshoot it better, it's a handy extension to be able to go and unminify, if that's a word. The other one Eric really likes is this image bloat. So if you follow him, he'll often taunt some major sites that do this wrong. So I'm going to hit Control F5. What it does is images have metadata. So if you've ever looked, so the guy who ran McAfee, the original founder, was on the lam. He was in, I don't remember, Colombia or somewhere. And then he was accused of murder. So he went on the run. He finally let somebody come down and interview him. in a nondescript location, not realizing they took a photo of him and it had part of the metadata as the lat long of where the photo was taken. So they were able to say that, yes, definitively, you did this interview in your neighboring country. We know where you are. And then eventually he gave up. And so make sure you strip that out. All the social networks also ran into this. People take pictures on their phone, upload them. The metadata, if you've ever seen it, has all sorts of stuff that is not used visibly in the image. So the idea of this extension is it's looking at every image and does it contain metadata? And if so, how much of that image size is metadata? So in this case, this little picture of London, it's about 43%. So from a performance standpoint, I could strip out 43% of the size of that without impacting the quality just by removing the metadata. So I use a tool called JPEG Tran, and I use that to run and take out all the metadata of the images that I host. But this is just a quick way for you to be able to go through. And the more that it's metadata, obviously, the more bricks you'll see. So you'll see, and he doesn't usually explain it. Eric will just have like, hey, here's whatever, big site number 1. Look at all their images, and he's got all these bricks, and you got to go figure out it's because they don't take their metadata out. So it's a quick way for you to just run through your own site. It looks like all my other images are okay. I just missed the ones that are up in this header. So that's a useful extension. And it's marking which ones, if I come back here, are the problems. I turn that off again. You can write your own. So again, if you want to, that's possible. Next thing is a separate tool. So with our site, it was not uncommon that I would have senior level, like vice president sort of people would say, the site's not working for me. What went wrong? I don't know, it didn't look right. And of course, I don't have any screenshots. They have nothing tangible for me to do any troubleshooting with. I don't want to tell them to install Fiddler because Fiddler's pretty easy, but it's not like senior vice president easy, right? So this tool is just a separate tool you can download. So I have it here. They would open this and it lets them do the things that I, as a developer, would typically want them to do, but in a way that's easier for them. So I can say, please clear your cookies, clear your cache, select this decrypt because I need to be able to see the content. They hit start capture. It'll open up a browser instance. They do what they want to do. When the screen doesn't look right, they can come over and hit a snapshot. So they'll take a screenshot. All of that stuff will get rolled into an archive file that I can then open in Fiddler. So when I get back to Fiddler, it'll be exactly like somebody used Fiddler to capture it. All the data capture stuff will be the same. It just made it easy for them. Start, do what you got to do, hit stop, capture, hit save, email me that if we're internal, and then I can do my troubleshooting. But again, it's just easier for non-tech people. Bunch of miscellaneous things. I showed you already how you could save response files. I'll show you the screenshot. So this again is another useful tool. I know never happens to you, but it seems that when my site doesn't work, they just say it didn't look right, and that's about the amount of detail that you get, which isn't very helpful. So I can actually come in here and there's a little camera. So I'm going to click that and I'm going to go back to my browser. So it's going to start doing a countdown. And audibly, I can hear it just did a countdown and it sounded like a camera snapping. So if I go back, you can see that actually got embedded now inside the Fiddler trace. So if I want, I can go through here and play with this and see exactly what did the screen exactly look like, and it'll be part of the capture. So I can see, and I can save that off if I want to and look at it wherever I want. But to be able to see what was on the screen is pretty helpful. You can encrypt files. So I haven't shown this yet. If I wanted to send this, like I said, to a third party, I can come in here and say, please save all the sessions. I want to give it a name, but here I can say I want it to be password protected. It's much better than what it sounds. It's actually AES encryption, so very standard, well supported. It defaults to 128-bit encryption. There's a way to change that to be 256. So now when I save this, it's going to ask me for a password. It's going to send that all encrypted. I can now email it to them. Obviously, in the same email, I'm not putting the password. I need to communicate that to them in some way. But there are sensitive things that are in here, right? I mean, it's stuff I'm sending back and forth. It could have my login credentials. It could have credit card. So if you're sending it anywhere, it's a good idea to save that and save it encrypted. I didn't mention it, but I do this all the time. Whenever I get a trace that I want to keep, I just save off all the sessions again, whether I encrypt them or not, just so in the future, I can come back and see how did this work. So every time I do a major change to a website, I'll do a before and after. I'll save those archives. 6 months from now, somebody will say, well, this doesn't work and it's never worked. I can go back and say, well, it did work. Back here, I've got a trace of it. So it's just handy to keep track of so that you know what's happening with the site over a period of time. So the saving is helpful. The next thing is it has a built-in text wizard. So as I said, I do capture the flag contests, and they'll also often give me something that's like base 64 encoded or something. So it looks like it's encrypted. How would you do that? How would you decrypt? I can go in the text wizard here. I can take some text, and then I can do all sorts of things down here. Like I can say, what does base 64 look like? That's the base 64. So I might be given this in one of the challenges, and equal is a dead giveaway that it's base 64. So I could come in here, paste that up there. Say I want to bring it from base 64. There it is. So there's just a lot of conversions that you have to do that you have to go search for. You know, what's the MD5 hash? I want to do hex encoding or not. That's all stuff that's built in if you just go to this text wizard area. So that's kind of cool. You can create custom inspectors. So the traffic that goes back and forth, Fiddler knows how to show me a CSS file, how to show me a JPEG, all that kind of stuff. In the past, there were certain protocols that were sending things across HTTP, and it wasn't easy to tell what was in them. So the people who knew those formats could create a custom inspector. So there'd be another tab down here that knew the exact structure of that particular file or whatever it was. So it could give you a proper view of it. So if you're ever looking at something, you say, well, I have this traffic, it's captured. I don't get to look into it like I normally would and see data. Go out and see if anybody has made a custom inspector for that type. Another one I'll talk about is Fiddler Core. So years ago, Fiddler's cool. It does all this tracking, tracing, all the things. Maybe you need to do that in your own .NET app. So maybe you have a .NET app and you want it to be able to capture things. Basically, they took the guts out of Fiddler, like made it headless, so to speak. Took out all the UI stuff and built the tracing and all the other stuff into a product called Fiddler Core. So you can actually get Fiddler Core. It's a bunch of library stuff that you can incorporate in a .NET app and have it do some of the tracing and other things that Fiddler could do. So we looked at the quick exec area. There are a lot of things I can do down here. So I can say I just want to see requests that are greater than 1,000 bytes or less than, excuse me. If I do greater than, so greater than 50K. So if you like doing command line stuff, there's a whole lot of stuff down here. So you can see, you know, I want to see all the 200 status codes. Yay, they all were. So you can just go look up the definition of what's in there. But again, if you like command line things, and I can do CLS, there's a lot of functionality built into Fiddler. And as you saw, I actually extended Fiddler, writing my own script for that. And I'm going to try host mapping. It didn't work earlier today when I did it, so I'll see if it works now that I did the encryption stuff. So what this lets me do is it says, first I'll show you example.com. That's example.com. What I can do is do a host remapping and say, if you go to example.com, I actually want you to use my site instead. Cross our fingers. Hopefully this works now. Oh, it did not. Yeah, It's different than what wasn't working today. What's cool about it when it's working, I'll have troubleshoot why it. I have had cases where I needed it to, I have JavaScript on the client that needs to think it's on the production version of our website. So I would have www, whatever our prod site was, but I'm actually running it on my machine in Visual Studio. The JavaScript would look at it though and say, you're running localhost. I'm not going to do anything. I could spoof it out to think that I would convince the client that it was on my production site. So all the JavaScript and everything thought it was, but it was actually running on my own machine on a port, which is kind of cool. So that's the stuff I wanted to show for Fiddler Classic. Talk about Fiddler Everywhere. So they're on version 5.6. The big wins with Fiddler Everywhere, multi-platform. So if you're on Linux or Mac and you want to be able to do this stuff, you need to use that. It does have an improved UI. So I'm used to looking at Fiddler Classic and I know where all the little things I need to find are. If you're relatively new to it, that can be very intimidating from just the UI perspective. So they've got a much more streamlined UI. They have a much better collaboration story. There's ways to share archives and things with other people. They support HTTP2, which is pretty critical. Fiddler Classic, they're basically not investing any more new functionality in Classic. So if you're doing a site and you need HTTP2, you're going to have to use Everywhere. There are a few features that are missing. The extensions like the image bloat, the Fiddler Script, the quick exec. They've been doing a great job catching up. Like recently, they put breakpoints in. So that's something that's available now. So I'm going to see if I have any luck with, because I had the problem earlier. I just want to show you a rough how the UI looks like. Most of the things we talked about are possible in Everywhere. It is a subscription service. That's the other difference. So if I come in here, one of the features I like, I can set up filters. So I actually set up a filter because, again, I don't want to see all that background chatter going back and forth. So I just set up filters like this that said if it's not my site or localhost, I don't want to see it. Let's go hit localhost. So I'm back to whatever was wrong. That's disappointing. Try that just to make sure it's not something with that. Otherwise, I'm going to go manually change my config. So this is a very odd situation to be in where I started them both up at the same time and it somehow messed up what the proxies were going to be. So this is what Fiddler Everywhere uses. 8866 is the default port. So I'll see if this makes it happy. It's not, oh, there we go. Okay. So you can see, as I was saying, it's capturing all this other stuff that's happening in the background, teams and all that kind of stuff. That's why I like the filter. So I'm going to put that filter on. So now I can get down to just what I want. It's got the same things we saw before. I can right click and do all the things that you'd want to do. I can do a composer. So here I just say I want to go look at this. I want to see it raw. And then I can make modifications like we were before. This is just the composer experience. They've done a lot of work on the roles. So I want to go back. So the rules here are very powerful. So I can drag, I can do the same things I was doing before. Let me drag over this one. Oops, sorry. This is easier, add a new rule. This is a lot of the capabilities. So I'm making some new videos for them about Fiddler Everywhere and how to do breakpoints. And I have, I'll show you where they are quickly. I've got a bunch of ones. My YouTube one disappeared. They have a bunch of Fiddler Everywhere and things out here that you can use for training, which is handy. But again, I can just come in here and set up sophisticated rules. And like I said, I think the breakpoints one will be out soon. So you can see how you can set up a breakpoint, But I can do the same things I did before. I could delay the request. I can return a file. And you can just see from a UI perspective, this is a bit cleaner, a little easier to navigate. So I do have 2 Pluralsight courses on Fiddler Classic. The newer one is you have a problem with your website. Should you use Fiddler? Should you use developer tools? So it walks through your styles don't work. Which one should you use? How would you troubleshoot a problem that looks like this? That's the first course. The other one is just Fiddler Classic alone, and it goes into all the details about how do you write an extension? How would you write an inspector? The same kind of things we walked through today, but just in more detail. The book, so Eric did write a book, Debugging with Fiddler. I've probably read, I don't know, 10, 15 times I've gone through it, because when I first started, I don't realize why I want some of the features. And then when I saw that host remapping once, I went back and looked at it again. So if you're using Classic a lot, that has a lot of good details. This is my link to where Fiddler Everywhere has some free videos for the stuff there. So Twitter, email, blog, there's the link to the slides. And we can open if there's any questions people have been waiting to ask.
Yeah, hi. I had put one in the chat, wondering whether Fiddler does anything with traffic on a WebSocket.
Fiddler Everywhere does. I have not seen that in Fiddler Classic. So Fiddler Everywhere does WebSocket traffic. The two, I'm doing 2 other videos, and I just saw they had a blog post on something else, but I believe they already have. If they don't, I can find it for you if you want to email me. But that is handled in Fiddler Everywhere. A lot of the newer protocols are in that aren't in Classic.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Any others?
Hey, Robert, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So I'm in person here. I've got a scenario that I'm curious how it was done. I was partially there, partially witnessed it. I understand Fiddler was used in some capacity with this. We were making a request to someone else's server.
Yep.
And the allegation was made that they were returning data incorrectly. And
Okay.
a network engineer on their side of things collected the network traffic from their server.
Okay.
And he said it would take a little bit of time to decrypt the traffic. And the next day he came back and said he had finished decrypting what he had captured and that the issue was in fact on their side. Their logs were claiming they were sending the correct stuff and the network showed they were in fact not.
Okay.
And I'm really curious, how did he do that? Because from our side, we did not trust any different SSL certificate. We did not proxy anything. We made the request just like we otherwise always did.
Right. So on their end, so they're not using Fiddler on their side to capture any of that, because it wouldn't be like a server-side tool where you'd be able to sneak in and see every web request. I've worked with ROps people. I don't think they might have Wireshark would be one of the choices. So that's, instead of being, I don't know if you've used Wireshark. So Fiddler's cool because it's high level and you see the whole request, the whole response, even though there's a bunch of network frames really to get even one request and response. It brings it up to the level for us of a full request and a response. Wireshark, instead of sitting as a proxy, it attaches itself to the network interfaces. So basically it can look like the old Microsoft Netmon. If you've ever used that, it's the same idea. You're hooking into exactly what the Ethernet card is seeing, etc. There are ways to set up Wireshark so that you can point to a key. So he probably used Wireshark. There's a way to configure Wireshark to kind of willingly let him see traffic in there. And so he probably did that to capture the stuff. Then he had to wade through it all, find out which were your requests. And by the way, this is not uncommon at all. All the disputes, I don't waste a lot of time telling people stuff because they usually don't believe you. between us and a vendor, it was not uncommon at all to be pointing fingers about who's doing what. And over the years, more and more of their engineers started to know Fiddler. So I would just do, here's my Fiddler trace, send it to them, you know, draw a big circle and say, you see that response right there from you? It's wrong. And over the years, as more of them got astute, I guess, at being able to troubleshoot and use Fiddler, it saved us a lot of time to just be able to see exactly what was being sent. And sometimes it might say what you did, which by the time it got in year end, something else had corrupted it, right? That's why he wants a trace, he or she, right, back at their server. But they're probably using Wireshark just because Fiddler won't play in that sort of environment because all the traffic isn't, yeah, there's no way to set the proxy basically to go through that. And you wouldn't want to, right, from the speed and everything else. Does that make sense?
Wonderful. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. I wish I would have kept a log over the years of I'm having an argument with a vendor and see what my record was of being accurate versus not. It was good. Often the third party people are just convinced that it must be you, and this Fiddler stuff just makes it very plain. So. Any others? If not, feel free, like I said, that's Twitter, email, blog information. Feel free to reach out if you do have any specific questions.
Yeah, Robert, thank you. This is Megan. Thank you for that great presentation.
Thanks, you're welcome.